What's up, all you mentees? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, and join me today for an advanced look at the Conan, the original Marvel Years Omnibus Volume 5. So, let's do this thing! Before getting started, a huge thank you to David Gabriel and the folks at Marvel for sending us an advanced copy of this omnibus. This omnibus is due out in the direct market on March the 3rd. And then a couple of weeks later in the book market. So places like cheap graphic novels, in-stock trades, Tales of Wonder will get it first, and then a couple of weeks later, the book market, which is Amazon or places like Barnes & Noble, will eventually get it. Now, what we're looking at here is the direct market cover. To your left, that is the standard edition cover by Alex Ross. So again, to the right is the direct market cover, only available at places like cheap graphic novels, in-stock trades, Tales of Wonder, your local comic book store, and on the left, available everywhere, including Amazon and places like Barnes & Noble. It feels just like yesterday that I remember the announcement of the first omnibus, and I got so excited because I had never read the classic Marvel Years. My introduction to Conan was, of course, the movies, then the animated show, and I fell in love with Kurt Busiek's Conan during his Dark Horse years. But this is the first time I've been reading these, and I could not put them down. This is volumes 1 through 4. All of that written by Roy Thomas. So this is the very first omnibus, Volume 5, that is written post Roy Thomas after he left. Now, Roy Thomas does have some stories, and I'll talk about that here in a second, but I just wanted to show you all the visual of what this looks like together, but more importantly, how it's going to fit on your shelf, unless you have a bunch of room and you could fit them the way I just had them earlier. But here are all the spines. Conan the Barbarian, the original Marvel Years, the creators behind the stories collected in here, and then you have, of course, a little picture of Conan with each volume down at the bottom, Marvel Omnibus logo up at the top. And I'm pretty sure you can tell this is the thickest Conan the Barbarian, the original Marvel Years Omnibus, compared to the previous volumes. So let's look at the backs. A new era in the legendary saga of Conan begins, and much like all the other backs, it has all the issues collected in here. The retail price of it is $125, much like all the other Conan Omnis that have come before it, and then rated T+. Tells you what it collects down at the bottom, but let's look at it under the dust jacket. So, under the dust jacket is the same logo they've been using for the entire Conan Omnibus line. Yeah, right there. Alright, let's get it open and talk about this book. So here we go. Same bookend page colors they've been using the entire time. Here's a picture by Big John Buscema. And the symbol again. The credits right here. All the writers and the pencilers, layouts, the inkers, letters, colorists, and editors. And then your table of contents. Now, we have so many introductions. And for the first time, I've never done this with a Conan book, but I did not read any of the introductions until after I had read the stories. So we have previously collected introductions from 2008 by J.M. DeMatteis for the Chronicles of Conan line, which was the Dark Horse reprints of the original Marvel Years. 3 J.M. DeMatteis introductions. A new introduction by Bruce Jones, who took over the book after J.M. DeMatteis left. And then, of course, what is Conan without an introduction by Roy Thomas? And this one, of course, is 4 pages, even though he wrote just a little bit of the stories in here. And we'll talk about that. Here's your Hyborian Age of Conan map. And then kicking off the series, or this omnibus, with issue 116. Now, this issue might look familiar, because this is the only time that Big John was inked by Neil Adams. But this was originally published, I think, in black and white by Towered Records. It was an exclusive Towered Records comic. You read along with them, so the dialogue had to be changed for this. So originally, this was written by Len Wein, and it took the talents of J.M. DeMatteis to come in and write the dialogue. And I say talents because reading his introduction after reading his run, it's pretty interesting how Jim Shooter and a bunch of other people, like Len Wein, had so much faith in the guy, even though he was new to comics, and he was still young at the time. So this was his very first published work at Marvel Comics. Well, he had worked on other things. Anyway, I'll let you read the introductions. They're really interesting. I'll just say a couple of things about them that I found ironic, if you will. But Big John, inked by Neil Adams. That is crazy. 2 of the biggest talents in comics just working together, and this is the only time that it's happened. Then we move on to issue 117, written by Larry Hama. Again, Big John working together with Ernie Chan. So Ernie comes in and inks his stuff. Now, Ernie Chan and Big John, they work together. I always enjoyed their stuff together. Ernie Chan gives some really thick black lines to his finished product. Not so much here, but later on. Now, Larry Hama is just this one issue, because after this issue, we do get J.M. DeMatteis taking over the run. And again, the artwork is by John Buscema. Now, the inks change over time. The inks change, and eventually it becomes Bob McLeod. And I love Bob McLeod. I think Bob McLeod is an amazing artist, just as much as I love John Buscema. However, it just didn't work. It was too clean. It was too crisp. It didn't feel like Conan by Big John. So, as far as the stories, because I'm sure people are going to ask me what I thought, and I know it's not a review of the book, I will say that J.M. DeMatteis' run was so different, as well as Bruce Jones' run. But it's so difficult to judge, because Roy Thomas was on the book for a decade of his life. It is so difficult that no matter who takes over the book, you're immediately going to be like, I don't care about this guy. This guy sucks compared to Roy Thomas. Roy Thomas is Conan, even though Robert E. Howard is Conan. But you get my meaning. It's the same way like when the Doctor changes. When the Doctor, I'm using Doctor Who reference here, but when the Doctor regenerates into a new actor, you immediately hate that new actor. You're like, man, that's not my Doctor. My Doctor was David Tennant. Or my Doctor was Tom Baker. Whatever it is, it takes a long time to get accustomed to the new person. And I think that's what happened here for a lot of people. I can't imagine reading this monthly, going from Roy Thomas to a couple of fill-ins, and then having J.M. DeMatteis, Uncanny Omar Talk Pretty one day, J.M. DeMatteis' run. Now, one thing that he did do that I was so confused about is that he gives them young traveling companions. We have the characters, let me see if I can find these two kids. Yes, these two kids right here. John Wallace and Dukenrick. Now, it's pretty interesting because, to me, kids really didn't fit into Conan's stories, especially as companions, because they kind of traveled with him for a while. So I found it interesting to read the intro after reading this run, because I've read all the way up to Gil Kane, when he comes in and takes over the book. But apparently John Buscema also agreed with that, so much so that he was complaining to the editor, who was Louise Jones at the time, eventually Wheezy, Louise Simonson. But, I mean, Big John was still Big John. Look at that. Look at that. That's the selling point of the book. Oh my gosh, that is beautiful. But he just wasn't happy with the story. He didn't think the two kids belonged in a Conan story. So, in the introduction, J.M. DeMatteis talks about how they had a phone call, just one phone call, sadly, and it wasn't a good one. It was literally Big John just telling him, this is what Conan is about, and pretty much everything got fixed within the next issue. So after issue 125, we get to 126. With the blood red eye of truth, J.M. DeMatteis keeps his word and changes the story arc into what he thinks John Buscema would have liked. However, Big John drew it, of course, and then left the book. So it's weird because we got Gil Kane out of that, and I'll talk a little bit about Gil Kane, and I've never seen this artwork from Gil Kane on a Conan book, so this to me is really cool. But it's really sad and ironic that Big John left because he didn't like the stories. And as I was reading it, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, none of this makes any sense. This doesn't feel like Conan. The dialogue is a little bit off. But right here, The Frost Giant's Daughter, this is his take on it. It's 4 issues. J.M. DeMatteis working with Gil Kane. I think he finally got the voice down. And I've really enjoyed these 4 issues. And like I said, this is my first time seeing Gil Kane's artwork on here. And it's so reminiscent of people like, I'm sure they borrowed from him, people like Walter Simonson, Rick Leonardi, artists like that. Because it's a lot, or at least to me, it looks different than his stuff that I've seen before on Green Lantern or Amazing Spider-Man. I like this kind of artwork. Has a little bit of like Barry Windsor Smith in there too. But this was his final story arc. This is J.M. DeMatteis' final story arc before we get into the new creative team of, here we go, Bruce Jones and Gil Kane, inked now by Ernie Chan. And do you see what I mean by Ernie Chan adding the dark, thick ink lines to artwork? Man, I mean, it's so good. It's like Ernie Chan drawing the book. And one thing I do notice is that they do give credit to Big John for being the penciler, but it feels like a lot of this was just breakdowns. So, I mean, that very well could have been, and that's what they gave credit to back then. Instead of calling it breakdowns, they called it pencils. But, I mean, it's a world of difference when you have Gil Kane inking his own stuff in these previous pages here, with Ernie Chan inking his stuff. So Bruce Jones takes over the book, and Bruce Jones also has an introduction. Now, I did not finish reading his run. I kind of read about 10 issues. I got to a really specific issue, which I'll talk about here in a second, and then I jumped ahead to the graphic novel because I was excited to read about that. So Bruce Jones, again, given Conan his own dialogue, it feels like he fought a lot more magicians during his run, or at least the stories that I've read. But the issue that stands out to me... Oh, and by the way, Big John does come back. John Buscema does come back and draw Conan again. It's during Bruce Jones' run. Now, this is the issue I was wanting to point out. So here we have issue 135. Two amazing things about this. You have a cover here by Walter Simonson, and then you have internal artwork, and I've never seen any of this, by Mark Silvestri. Not looking like Mark Silvestri. Mark Silvestri, if you've seen my videos for a long time, if you've been a follower of my channel, Mark Silvestri is my favorite penciler, artist of all time. Even when he does his own inks, I love it. It's sketchy, and I always thought his art was very similar to John Buscema, especially when he was drawing Wolverine or X-Men. And it's funny that I didn't even know, other than the covers, and I think he did some internal artwork in the late 80s, I had no idea that he drew Conan here in, like, what is this, 1981, I think, or 82? But his art is so different. Now, of course, that could be because of the inker. And in this particular issue is Joe Rubinstein and Andy Bulanadi. But, I mean, there's a little bit of maybe Mark Silvestri in some of the panels, but it just feels so different. But then, yes, we get, eventually, Big John comes back, Ernie Chan does his inks, and then Ernie Chan, I don't know if he was trying out different things, but his inks get heavy. This is what it starts to look like. I mean, there are some dark tones used for those inks right there. And also back here, it feels like Ernie Chan is more of a finisher and less of an inker. You can probably tell by some of the backgrounds, but it's not always like that. But just look at that. That John Buscema, this is like the John Buscema that I remember from the late 80s, early 90s. And before I go any further, one thing I didn't even mention is what this book collects. So this does collect Conan the Barbarian 116 to 149, so post Roy Thomas. Conan the Barbarian Annual 6 through 9, and I'm going to explain how they did that. And then Conan of the Isles, which is the graphic novel that came out in 1988. And you're probably wondering why books from 1981 and 1982 are collecting a graphic novel from 1988. Well, it's pretty important, and they do explain here why they do it. As well as the classic What If issue number 39. Now, why collect this graphic novel from 1988? So let's talk about that after I look at some of this Gil Kane artwork. Okay. You get the idea. So annual number 6 is the cover that you see on the direct market. And like I was showing earlier, it does have Gil Kane on artwork. So here we have annual number 7. So instead of reprinting annual number 7, what they did was collect the 3 stories that were written by Roy Thomas, drawn by Big John, and put them together in a graphic novel that came out later in 1988 because they thought a year apart would just be too long to tell one story that is split up into 3 parts. So while Annual 7 is collected in here. And here, all these pinups. I really like the pinups here. But here is the Conan graphic novel that came out in 1988 with this new cover. And then Roy Thomas, John Buscema, all the inkers, including Dave Simmons, doing some of the inks. And this story was awesome because it talks about when Conan is a little bit older and he's King Conan. And we don't have any of that stuff collected, the King Conan stuff. So it's really cool to see Roy Thomas go back to this character, even though he wrote this before he left the book. But, you know, it feels like Conan again. It feels like his tone, and he's working with John. So I thought that was really cool that they included the entire thing. So I did skip ahead and read this. I need to go back and finish Bruce Jones's run. Now, that is everything that they wrote. I think there's a new writer that comes in with volume 6, which is crazy. I guess these books have been selling so well that we're going all the way to 6 so far. So let's keep going. Or at least I would love for them to keep going. I would eventually like a shelf just of Conan books. But that's how much I love these stories. Alright, so here in the back is What If Thor Battled Conan the Barbarian. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why are they collecting this here? Because it's going to be collected in the What If Omnibus. Well, Because not everybody gets every single omnibus, that's why. So they realized that not everyone that's going to get the What If omnibus is getting Conan and vice versa. So they did include this story here because it features Conan and he's battling the God of Thunder. And I will let you finish how that story works out on your own. But let's look in the back here for some extras. Yeah, Marvel Age number 1, Conan the Comedian, and Life Among Barbarians. These are all from Marvel Age. And yes, original artwork. Man, whoever is lucky enough to own some of this, Gil Kane stuff is solid too. But to have just, I would love to have a page of Big John with Ernie's inks. Covers, the sketches for some of the covers. And finished covers here by John Buscema. Unused cover with the color guide. So they never used this cover for issue 149. And then original art here from Gil Kane. So they also put the forwards here by Bruce Jones. I guess they didn't want to add too many to the front of the book. This is from his Conan Chronicles that were originally published, like I mentioned, by Dark Horse, collecting the original Marvel years. And then this is, of course, the standard edition cover by Alex Ross. That's gorgeous as well. Let's look at the binding. The book is sewn binding, has 1,048 pages. This particular omnibus, much like its predecessor, Volume 4, was printed at the iMac printer in Turkey. And I will say that the paper feels thicker than it does with the Kurt Busiek omnibus. Remember, that particular paper felt a little bit thinner than I was used to. But let me see. Let's go to the beginning. So here we are towards the beginning where you can find the table of contents. And you can probably tell there's gutter loss right there. Not that many spreads in the book, spread pages rather, but there are some, and it doesn't really affect it unless it's at the beginning or towards the end. But for the most part, I mean, most of the panels look like this. They're broken up into different pages. Like I mentioned, not that many spread pages. Let's look in the back. And this is how it lays over in the back. But that, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing this book when it comes out, don't forget to check out our sponsor, CheapGraphicNovels.com, your online source for collected editions up to 50% off retail price. Cheap Graphic Novels prides itself on excellent packaging, so your stuff gets to you in excellent condition, and they have amazing customer service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And for all you Minties that are watching, if you're a first-time customer, don't forget to mention that Near Mint Condition sent you their way for a promotional credit on free shipping on your next order. Now, this is only for U.S. customers. CheapGraphicNovels.com, your source for the hottest books with deep discounts, customer service, and excellent shipping that will keep you coming back for more. And that was the content, the page count, and the build of this omnibus. Let me know in those comments down below if you plan on continuing your Conan omnibus collection, or if you stopped with Roy Thomas, if you've never read any of these stories, or if this, just like me, is your first time reading the original Marvel years. I would love to know all those comments down below. And if you did read this era of Conan, let me know in the comments down below what you thought of it. Again, this was the Uncanny Omar. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications to let you know when our videos are going live. We can be found on Redbubble and on Patreon. Amazing ways to support the channel, and thank you so much to our patrons for making videos like this possible. More importantly, please everybody, stay healthy, stay safe, and much love to all of you.